welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day so far, and thank you so much for joining me for another art video. So today's video is going to be a kind of continuation from the video that I uploaded last Friday, in which I share my opinions and explain to you why, when it comes to painting with watercolor, unless you have a very particular art style or are creating grayscale studies that call for the use of ready-made black, like say lamp black, ivory black, Mars black, etc., straight out of the pen or tube, then you're probably going to be better off creating your own dark color mixtures. So if you haven't watched that video yet, then please do, because in that one I explain why this is very useful, and today I'm sticking to the how we can apply this information in a practical way. I am sharing specific color combinations with you, as well as exercises, and providing actual tips for you to put to use. And real quick, before getting started, I just want to send out a huge welcome to all you new people just visiting my channel today for the very first time. Consider subscribing, because every single Friday I share a new video with art tips, drawing and painting tutorials, and encouragement for aspiring artists. Let's get into it. Alright everyone, so being the visual person that I am, and if you're here then you're probably a visual person as well, I know how important it is to actually see the different parts of an explanation separately with actual visual examples, and so this is why I wanted to start out this video by just creating a couple of different swatches using my ready-made blacks that I had available for me in my watercolor palettes. So I'm going to swatch out an ivory black as well as a lamp black and a Payne's gray. All of these are very common colors that are often integrated into commercial watercolor sets. The way these different blacks are created really vary from brand to brand. However, ivory black is usually described as being a warm, smooth black, and it used to be made from burnt ivory taken from endangered animal species. It's not anymore, so don't worry about that. Lamp black, on the other hand, is often described as being a cool black. It is often very opaque and very, very intense. Lamp black is usually created by burning tar, carbon, and oil. Something that I want you guys to notice is how, even though these ready-made blacks are described as being either warm or cool biased, when I am creating these gradients right here in these swatches, I cannot really tell any distinctive, vibrant, warm, or cool undertones. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry, I'm going to be describing this much more in depth in the examples coming up next. But the main thing that I want you to notice here with the ivory black and the lamp black is that they are very neutral, they are very flat looking, and they are not as luminous as the color mixtures that I'm going to show you next. So even though a ready-made black is going to allow you to very easily create tonal contrast in your piece, they can very easily lead to very heavy, stark, and flat shapes and lines, and even dull out your other colors around them. Now, I also wanted to make sure to include the Payne's gray in this initial set of swatches. Payne's gray is also a very common color found in commercial watercolor sets, and I want you to notice how, even though this is a ready-made color straight out of the pen, it has a lot more liveliness and dimension to it, and it is not as flat looking when compared to the ivory black and the lamp black. And the reason this is because Payne's gray is a mixture of black and blue. And I can definitely see cool undertones in that Payne's gray gradient. Now, the same thing applies with the Payne's gray as with the blacks that I mentioned before. The components in your Payne's gray paint are going to vary from brand to brand. But I know a few different brands that their Payne's gray is basically a combination of ivory black and ultramarine blue. At this point, these three swatches are almost 100% dry. And yes, of course, you can tell that the Payne's gray is lighter than the blacks. But at the same time, if I wanted to deepen and darken that top swatch, for example, all I have to do is wait for that wash to dry completely, and go back and add a second wash of Payne's gray, and that is going to darken it. And when it comes to watercolor, I have said it time and time again, but we're looking to create a very wide variation in transparencies and values, because value is what adds contrast. It adds tonal contrast to a piece, and value, that range from darks to lights, really is what creates a sense of three-dimensional form and depth. However, I really feel that you should have in mind that when it comes to watercolor, it's about more than just creating a tonal contrast. It's about really playing with the medium's characteristics of glowiness and luminosity and playing with colors in dynamic ways. And when you see it in this way, it's easier to understand why it's best to stay away from colors that can flatten and dull out our vibrant colors. Now, this is something that I am continuously working on myself as I strive towards improving my own watercolor skills, because I started painting with acrylics and oils, which are painting mediums that are completely different from this medium, and they are to be approached in a very, very different way. Now, because color is so important when we are painting with this medium, I feel it's really essential that beginners really get to know the color wheel and learn about color relationships. I always preach about how I really love using a limited color palette. It doesn't really matter what painting medium I'm using, but I like keeping colors limited in order to make sure that the colors look harmonious and cohesive at the end. And I also preach about how important it is for you to learn to plan your colors before starting with the actual painting process. Alright, you guys, so let's get into the dark color mixtures that I'm going to be sharing with you today. And I'm going to get started with the one that I like least, but I think it's the first one that I should share. It's the mixture of the three primary colors, so yellow, blue, and red. The specific color names that I wrote down on my watercolor paper, I selected these because these are just the, I guess you could say, truest primaries that I had on hand. You don't necessarily have to use the cadmium yellow, you don't have to use the ultramarine blue, and you don't necessarily need to use a cadmium red. Just select the red, yellow, and blue that you have on hand that seem most like primaries to you, and try this mixture with those. I feel a lot of beginners get tripped up because they don't have a specific pigment on hand that they're seeing the person use in their tutorial or whatever it is they're watching. But in my opinion, it's a lot more important to not fear playing around with colors, because this is what's going to allow you to better understand color mixtures. And at the same time, I feel it's a lot more important for you to start being able to tell whether a color is warm biased or cool biased than knowing its specific color name. As always, I just like to really encourage you guys to use what you have and don't be afraid to be hands-on with your exploration. I like this color combination least of all the ones that I'm going to share with you today, because we have to mix 3 different pigments together. And of course, this means that we have to play around with the ratios of each color until we arrive at a good, solid, dark color. You can see how dark this mixture looks on my paint mixing palette. You can perceive a bluish, purplish undertone in the gradient that I created, making that color mixture cool bias. And because I had to create more color mixture because I ran out in the middle of the swatching process, the flat block of color in the bottom turned out to be a little bit more red than the mixture that I used on top. And of course, the overall finish and the overall temperature of your swatches is really going to depend on the color ratios that you use in your mixtures. I don't really go for a 50-50 of each when I am using 2 different colors, or 3 equal parts when I am using 3 different colors. But I do make sure that the color mixture on my palette looks very, very dark. And of course, if I were actually creating a full painting with them, I would make sure that I have more than enough color mixture already prepared so that I don't run out of my color and then have to redo my color, because as you probably already know, it's very, very difficult to arrive at the exact same color when you are mixing colors together. Next, I'm going to show you a couple of blue plus brown combinations that are pretty popular in the watercolor world. Out of all of the dark color combinations that I'm going to be sharing with you today, these are probably the ones that are going to result in the most neutral grayish tones. And the reason this is because, at least with the Winsor & Newton colors that I am using for this, the burnt sienna and the burnt umber are browns that are leaning more towards the orange side. And because I am mixing them with ultramarine blue, which is a color that is opposite to orange in the color wheel, they are going to kind of neutralize each other and it's going to turn more into a gray. So if you're really set on having a very black looking color in your painting, this could be a good mix for you. And even though on screen this seems a lot more neutral than the colors that I'm going to show you next, when you see these firsthand, and I highly recommend you actually try these color mixtures for yourself, you are going to notice a bit of a color temperature to it, and it's not going to look as flat and opaque as the ready-made blacks that we saw in the beginning of the video. I really like these color combinations when I am looking for something a bit more neutral, and I find them amongst the easiest to create out of all of the ones that I'm going to be showing you today. Okay, moving on to the next color mixture, and this is a mixture of red plus green. I am going to try out a permanent carmine plus a phthalo green. Permanent carmine is a red that is leaning a little bit towards the purple side. This means that it has a tiny bit of blue in it, making it a cool red. And in this color mixture, we're mixing it together with a phthalo green, which is a cool green that has blue in it. I previously stated that it's very important to be able to start telling whether a color is warm biased or cool biased. And the reason this is because it's going to affect our color mixtures. If you can readily tell that a specific color has a lot of another color in it, which, by the way, when you're working with watercolor, looking at a color in a pan is not enough for you to be able to tell this. You're going to have to actually swatch it out and see how it looks on paper. But if you do swatch it out and you can really tell that that color is a combination of two colors mixed together, like say a blue-green, and then you attempt to mix it with another ready-made color, then what you have to understand is that you're really mixing three colors together and not only two. Now, I want to share a quick note on the color wheel. If you have studied the color wheel in very basic terms, you probably already know that the color wheel can be divided into halves, one half being the warm side and one half being the cool side. However, that is a very, very basic explanation of how color temperature works. Because really, any color, it doesn't matter where it is in the color wheel, can be thought of as being either warm or cool biased, depending on what colors are mixed into it and also what colors they are being compared to. Take a green, for example, which is usually considered a cool color. If the green has a lot of yellow mixed into it, then it would be considered a warm green. But if the green has a lot of blue mixed into it, then it could be considered a cool green. And there are so many different schools of thoughts when it comes to color and color theory, and even different kinds of color wheels depending on which artist you ask. So don't get tripped up if you see contradicting thoughts on color theory out there when you're doing your studying. And focus on creating color mixtures for yourself firsthand and developing that eye for being able to tell, oh, that green has a lot of blue in it, or oh, that red is leaning more towards the cool side than the warm side, because that's going to help you a ton in your painting. In the past, I have mentioned how it's so useful for people just starting out learning about color to create a color wheel completely from scratch, using only the three primary colors to create all of the different color mixtures of secondary and tertiary colors. When you do this kind of exercise, I would recommend that you look for three primaries that are either all warm biased or all cool biased. Okay, that's the end of my note on the color wheel. So here we can see that the mixture of permanent carmine and phthalo green allowed for a very dark color mixture that allows us to create from very, very dark values to lighter values. And at the same time, it has dimension, vibrancy, and it certainly has a color temperature leaning towards the cool side. Okay, so we're getting into the next color combination, and this is another set of red plus green. And for this one, we're gonna mix together alizarin crimson and hooker's green. Alizarin crimson is a cool red, and I would consider the hooker's green that I'm using from Winsor & Newton to be cool biased because it looks like it has a little bit of blue in it. It looks a lot cooler than my sap green, which looks like it has a lot more yellow in it. But again, this is going to vary from brand to brand. So really, it's going to be super useful for you to be able to develop your own eye and come to your own conclusions based on a case-by-case scenario. And the last dark color mixture that I want to share with you today is a bit of a wild card. And it's the dark color that I created for my last video that I used to paint the toucan's body with. And I really wanted to include this mixture here because this is a mixture that I really came up with on the spot by myself without looking for any recipes from other artists on the internet or anything like that. And I really want to encourage you guys to create your own color combinations after having learned about the color wheel. Don't be afraid to mix different things and see what comes up. Of course, always test out your color combinations before actually using them in a watercolor painting, but never be afraid to discover your own color combinations. Look at how dark this color combination looks at its most saturated. Alright, so at this point I'm going to bring out the initial ready-made black color swatches again so that we can compare them in their completely dry state to the new color swatches created with our color mixtures. Though the color mixtures created with the burnt umber and the burnt sienna don't really translate very well on screen for some reason, I really hope that you're able to tell how much more luminous and lively the color mixtures are when compared to the ready-made blacks. This said, as we saw with the Payne's gray situation, we can definitely make a ready-made black like Ivory Black and Lamp Black look a lot more interesting and dynamic by adding a second color to them. I would really love to know in the comment section below which kinds of darks you like most and would like to use in your own paintings. Do you like warmer darks more or do you like cooler darks more? Next, you're going to see me test out darkening my primary colors using first black and then sepia. So the first row of colors you see are my primaries straight out from the pan. And then the second row is the colors with a little bit of black added in. And the third row are the colors mixed together with sepia. With this test, I just really wanted to show you guys that you don't really need black to darken any colors. If you're like me and you really like to create high levels of contrast in your paintings, and you oftentimes don't feel that one single pigment goes dark enough for you, then there are always other options. You don't have to reach for the black. Of course, it's going to depend on what it is you're painting, but if you do decide to go for the black, then just be very, very careful because it tends to dull out and muddy up colors, making them appear a little bit dirty. For example, oftentimes I reach for analogous colors, but others I go for more neutral earthy browns like I did right here. And for the final section of this video, I am going to show you how I paint a sphere using one of these dark color mixtures. I'm going to be using the alizarin crimson plus hooker's green mixture for this. And I also want to finish up with giving you a couple of specific tips on creating very dark saturated colors because I know that a lot of beginners struggle with this. Now, this has a lot to do with water control, and I previously created a very thorough video on this topic that I'm going to make sure to link to down below in the description box. But the first thing to consider here is the quality of your paint. Now, those of you who have been seeing my videos for a while know that I am very basic when it comes to my watercolor painting supplies. I don't consider myself to be picky at all, and you guys have seen me use student grade sets for many paintings, and I've been perfectly capable of creating very dark darks. However, many times, and I have shared this before, because watercolor dries lighter than how it looks when it's wet, many times I go back and add depth and contrast through layering. And I use these techniques even with my higher quality watercolor sets like the Schmincke one that I have right here in this video. This said, I think it's very important for you just to have in mind that the color payoff that your paint allows is really going to depend on its quality. And whether this affects you or not is totally going to depend on your own personal watercolor painting techniques. So just as an example, some of the swatches that I created in the previous parts of this video were created using Winsor & Newton Cotman line pans, but other swatches were created using my very expensive Schmincke set. And I think that you could tell that I could get all of them very dark. And in fact, this sphere that you're watching me paint right now is created using my alizarin crimson and my hooker's green from my Winsor & Newton Cotman line set. And for those of you who don't know, this is a very accessibly priced student grade set offered by Winsor & Newton. This is a product that I usually recommend to people just starting out because it offers pretty good quality for a very accessible price. However, if you try to go for anything less than student grade or attempt to get very rich, saturated, dark looking colors with those Crayola or very chalky looking watercolor sets, then that's probably going to be a little bit difficult. Many times, the colors in those cheaper watercolor sets don't even mix well together. So I kind of combine my first two tips into one. The first is to make sure that you are using a decent quality watercolor set. And my second is to try layering. If you feel that something needs a bit more contrast, you can always allow that section to dry and go back in and make some sections darker. Another tip is to make sure that when you're creating your combination of colors, you are getting it to the darkest point that you can possibly get it to on your color mixing palette. Your little puddle of paint should look very dark, if not black. And I talk about this in my water control video, but for this to happen, you're going to have to create a heavily saturated paint mixture that contains a lot of paint and a little bit of water. Remember that when we're working with this medium, we are using water to dilute our paint and to make the colors lighter and more translucent. In other words, the less amount of water you have in your paint mixture, the darker your color is going to be. In my water control video, I talk a lot about how I cannot work with watercolor without having an absorbent towel by my side. You can see my blue Scotch Shop towel right here on my desk beside me, and you can see how often I remove the excess water from my paintbrush bristles. Another way that I'm constantly removing the excess water from my paintbrush bristles is by gently scraping the bristles against the top of my glass of water. And when I am trying to create a very dark color, I am doing my best not to bring in any more water than necessary into my paint mixture. And if I notice that for some reason I have added more water into my paint mixture, what I do is I immediately make sure to add more pigment into the water to darken it back up again. Alright everyone, that is it for today. I really hope that you enjoyed this video and that you learned something new. Let me know in the comment section below which dark color combination you like best or which one you would like to try next in your own paintings. I would really appreciate a like if you like this video because it really helps my channel get in front of more people. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you and see you next Friday. Bye!